Welcome to the second episode of the MMA Lockcast this week. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, ensuring you leave no stone unturned for these upcoming MMA events, covering 17 different promotions from all over the world, approaching 4,300 fighter profiles for you to browse through. Make sure you guys check it out. There's a 7-day free trial, and you can find out why we have just surpassed 90 subscribers on the service. Again, 7-day free trial. Check the link in the description below and get direct links to past fights for all these fighters. And it'll save you a lot of time if you like studying, predicting, and breaking down these fights. And very handy for the Contender Series as well. All right, we're going to be breaking down a Bellator Championship Series London. Unfortunately, there are no champions on this card. It was originally scheduled to be a rematch between Johnny Eblen and Fabian Edwards that was going to headline this card, but an injury, I believe, between to one of those guys is postponing the fight, and in steps a number one contender matchup between Leah McCourt and Sarah Collins. Very, very abysmal card here in terms of name value as well. It was hilarious seeing Bellator announce this on their Instagram page and seeing the myriad of comments flowing in saying people wanted refunds. So one thing to kind of keep an eye on when you're watching this fight or this event is what the crowd is going to look like, considering the amount of people that probably backed out of this event after Johnny Eblen and Fabian Edwards fell out. I do want to quickly say off the top here, I did mention to somebody last month that I would break down the KSW card this month for them, but unfortunately, I am up against the clock here in terms of family obligations over the next couple of days, and my free time or at least my ability to work and break down these cards and provide video breakdowns for you guys. So there will be no KSW 98 video breakdown for you guys this week. It will be in written form on the Lock of the Night Patreon page, as well as the LFA breakdown will be in written form, so make sure you guys check that out. But I got you guys covered for the UFC. I got you guys covered for Bellator, and I know those are the two promotions that you guys very much appreciate me breaking down, as well as PFL and the Contender Series. So again, appreciate the love, appreciate the support. Last week, for last Bellator San Diego card, we swept the card. We were able to call the underdogs. We were able to call the favorites. Let's see if we can do the same thing here for this 10-fight card that goes down in London. I also believe it is a afternoon card for the East Coast folks, so it won't coincide with the UFC 306 card later on that night. So yeah, a full day of MMA. I won't be able to watch any of it live, but hopefully we can cash some tickets while we're out there and enjoying the day. All right, let's not waste too much more time. Let's get right into it. I'm going to be quite brief with these breakdowns, as I normally am for Bellator and PFL, as compared to my UFC breakdowns, which I go way more in depth about. So without further ado, let's get right into it. First fight up, we got Iman gonna butcher this very badly. I apologize. Almudhaf. Coming in at plus 135, going up against Diakiese. Silva coming in at minus 165. Now, I'm very surprised that the line is the way that it is. Even yesterday, when I researched this card, this line was about plus 145, plus 150 for Iman, and I don't understand it. Now, Iman, to me, looks like the better fighter. Diakiese looks more like the better athlete. She's way more built. She's obviously very physical, very strong, but a lot of the things that she does relies on her strength and her bullying tactics, and even in the striking realm, she looks very robotic with the way that she throws. Iman, on the other hand, looks very aggressive, especially with a grapple-heavy approach. She trains out of a great team with a Great Britain top team under the tutelage of Brad Pickett. She has great training partners, namely Kate Baset. Bacic, I believe her name is, 5-1 prospect out of the same gym as well. Both of these women have fought pretty much can level opponents up until this point, but to me it looks like Iman has a little bit more potential, considering the grapple heavy approach she normally brings to the table and her ability to scramble and get to some dominant positions. She's finished all 4 of her professional wins, whereas Silva, I believe she finished her last 2 wins, which were against the same opponent within the span of 4 months. Again, I don't understand why Silva is the favorite here. Again, she might be stronger, but I think she's gonna failed to be the technically better fighter, especially in these scrambling situations. And I think we'll see Aman do a great job in terms of getting to the dominant positions and possibly even finding a finish. So I love Iman as a dog to kick off the card here. You can even get her to win inside the distance at plus 375 on Bet Online. I took a little bit of a sprinkle on that as well. All right, next up, wonderful fight here. Now, this is what I'm loving about this new era of Bellator. They're finally putting these prospects against each other that they've kind of been slowly bringing along before PFL purchased them. Last week, we saw Jordan Newman go up against Imam Shafi Aliyev, and we saw Jordan Newman as a big underdog in that fight. He ended up cashing as the dog, but it goes to show that they can finally start putting these highly respected prospects in these high-level matchups against each other and then see who really deserves to come out on the winning end. So in this aspect, we got two fights on this card that are along those lines. Undefeated Dara Kelly coming in at plus 160. Undefeated Dmitry Hrytsenko coming in at minus 200. Very, very fun fight here. So Kelly will start off on his side of things. He went 9-0 as an amateur, currently 6-0 as a pro. He's finished all of them, if I'm not mistaken. But he's very good with his grappling and his submission game. Last time around, we saw him sell out for a Darce choke, but once he realized that he didn't have it, he did a great job in terms of adjusting his grip, getting a guillotine, and eventually put his opponent clean out. He's very good when he's able to latch onto his opponents, as he has great grips, a nasty hold when he's able to get those chokes in, and does a great job in terms of riding his opponents and eventually waiting to find that finishing position. He trains out of SVG Ireland alongside other hot up-and-coming prospects, just like Kieran Clarke in the next matchup that I'll be talking about. And Kelly is probably going to be one of the better, if not the best, prospect to come out of SVG Ireland, out of those crop of young and up-and-comers at this moment. I'm very surprised that he's at plus 160 here, considering that we normally see him as a minus 1,000 favorite in all of his matchups. Obviously, Hrytsenko is not any of the lower level guys that he's been going up against, but I've been very impressed with what I've been seeing from Kelly. Now, Hrytsenko on the other side is coming off of a dominant victory over Justin Montavio, and that was a matchup where I really expected Hrytsenko have to rely on his wrestling to have success, but he did a great job in terms of taking command of that fight from jump and putting the striking pressure on Montavio, bewildering Montavio, and Montavio had no answer, and even Montavio ended up going for takedowns, which obviously did not come to fruition. Hrytsenko did a great job in terms of mixing his grappling with his striking, but primarily his striking was the reason why he ended up winning that matchup. Now, Hrytsenko is a guy that I cashed as an underdog against Daniel Skitidze in his Bellator debut. He was relatively unknown, but from what I saw on his regional tape, he looked to be pretty damn good. Now, both these guys are very talented, but I expected this fight to be closer to a pick'em before I saw the odds, and I was pleasantly surprised to see Kelly as the plus 160 dog. I think he's worth a shot here, considering his grappling could end up being the difference maker. Although Hrytsenko might be the better striker, I think Kelly will do a great job in terms of initiating the clinch and getting the wrestling going, and Hrytsenko could provide some resistance in that spot, but I do expect this to be a much closer fight than a near 65 to 70% indicated here for Hrytsenko. So I'm gonna lean on the Kelly side to cash as another dog here. I think he's really good, especially when he can get his grappling going. If he can't get his grappling going, then it might make sense why Hrytsenko will be minus 200 in this spot. But I'm more than willing to take the shot here on Kelly to cash as a dog and prove myself right in terms of thinking that he'll be one of the best prospects to come out of SPG Ireland. Our next up, Kieran Clarke going up against Thomas Gronvall. Now, this fight actually got put together yesterday, so there are no odds out for it as of yet. But Clarke had a very abysmal amateur run where he went 13-11, but since turning pro in 2019, he's won 9 fights, finishing 6 of them. He showcases a relentless grapple-heavy approach, looking to take opponents to the ground and just grind them out. He does a great job in terms of doing that waist wrap ride against a fence, riding his opponent's back and just putting them through the grind. He has a great gas tank to go 15 minutes if he needs to. His striking obviously needs a little bit of work still. His durability has kind of bailed him out of some very bad spots. So that's something that he's going to have to be very thankful of. But hopefully we see him continue to improve his striking game. But he is a very good grappler and very good at grinding his opponents down. Gronvall is taking this fight on 5 days' notice and actually took his last fight on short notice as well, which was 3 months ago after he lost to Khurshid Kakarov, who is the current reigning PFL Europe champion. Gronvall likes to lean on his wrestling as well, but I just don't think he has what it takes to get to that next level and defeat guys of Clarke's level. I expect this fight, I expect this fight, or at least the line to be somewhat close here. Maybe Clarke no more than minus 200. I'd be willing to take a shot on Clarke at anything better than minus 200 in this fight. Again, I think he's just obviously the one preparing for this matchup. Gronvall taking it on short notice, and just given Clarke's style and his ability to put guys to the grind, he might be a little bit challenged early in this matchup, but as it starts to go into deeper water, I expect Clarke to start taking over and end up winning this fight on the scorecards. All right, next up, Joseph Luciano coming in at minus 200, going up against Stephen Hill, who comes in at plus 160. Luciano makes his short notice Bellator debut here on 2 weeks' notice. He was a very solid fighter. I believe he only has 1 defeat or 2 defeats on his record. The last defeat was a close fight where he was unable to get his grapple-heavy approach going. His opponent did a great job in terms of stuffing the takedowns and getting back to his feet and then putting the pressure on him with the striking. Luciano comes from a Muay Thai background, but has pretty much been engulfed in the grappling exchanges when he's able to go out there and compete, and he doesn't really give his opponents much time to breathe. He trains out of the same training camp as UFC fighter Jack Jenkins, and he looks to be a decent prospect. Now, after he lost that fight, he did bounce back with the win over a 7-0 opponent, but looking deeper into that 7-0 opponent, but also just seeing the tape on that fight, you see that 7-0 opponent was a can crusher in the Philippines, and he got absolutely smashed by Luciano in 80 seconds in that fight. Stephen Hill is coming off of his first loss at the hands of Mike Shipman, who I believe fights in the next matchup, but that was a fight where we saw Hill take a very bad illegal knee halfway through that first round, and to me it didn't seem like he fully recovered from that, as Shipman, after getting a point docked from himself, put the pressure right back on Hill, landed some more legal knees this time around, and eventually Hill was unable to answer the bell after the first round, and I think that was an anomaly of a performance from Hill, considering how badly he must have been hurt from that illegal knee to begin with. He comes from a boxing background, but he also is a BJJ black belt, and that's what he often relies on when he's looking to take his opponents out. Like I said, he was undefeated going into that fight against Mike Shipman, and I think he was one of the hotter prospects on the Bellator roster. I think his striking does a great job in terms of setting up his takedowns, and from there he does a great job in terms of finding finishing positions and putting his opponents away. This is a fight where it seems to me that the line was slightly overcorrected here on Hill, considering how dominant of a victory it looked like for Mike Shipman, but I think people are overlooking the repercussions of what that illegal knee did to Hill's performance for the rest of the night. I see, Luciano's performances, and he did pretty much what Mike Shipman was able to do to Hill to Luciano's opponents, but I think that Luciano will face a little bit more resistance than actually being a minus 200 favorite here. I have some concerns in terms of if I'm not giving Luciano enough credit, which is why I'm probably not going to end up betting this fight, but I still lean on Hill as a prediction here at plus 160. If you have the balls, go for it. I think he's worth a shot here, and I think he is the better fighter, not to mention he is the one that was preparing for this matchup. Luciano, normally a welterweight, only gets about a 5-pound allowance here as this fight takes place at 175 pounds. And Hill, again, even in his last fight, he fought a 185-pounder, and he has competed at 185 pounds in the past, but the fight prior to this, he fought at 170 pounds, and it seemed to me that he was trying to get down to welterweight moving forward. So maybe the size also had something to do with Hill getting dominated in his last fight. I'm going to go Hill by decision. I expect this to be closer than the line says, but again, I'm a little bit hesitant in terms of pulling the trigger, as Luciano could end up being better than I'm actually expecting him to be. All right, next up, Mike Shipman coming in at plus 120, going up against Islam Abdul Baset, coming in at minus 150. We just talked about Mike Shipman. He has that dominant victory, handing Stephen Hill the first loss of his professional career. Shipman was 1-3 between 2019 and 2022, but he's managed to right the ship Wink, wink. But now he's on a 2-fight winning streak, grinding out Charlie Ward and then having that win over Stephen Hill. He's a grapple-heavy fighter, loves to push the pace, loves to push the pressure. He does slow down later in matchups if he's unable to dictate the pace and unable to fight fights at his pace. And that's where I think he ran into issues against Fabian Edwards and the Costello Van Steenis. And I think that's where he could run into issues here against Baset, who may end up being the better grappler. Baset has an impressive 16-2 record, with his last loss coming by split decision back in late 2019. And since then, he's won 7 straight fights and looked pretty damn good doing so. He actually has a victory over a fighter that is headlining the KSW card this weekend, and he absolutely dominated him that night. Baset is a big, brooding fighter that loves to put pressure on his opponents and put them through the wrestling grind. I'm expecting both these guys to look to actually utilize that approach here, but I think it will be Baset that comes out on the winning end. I think Baset might be the slightly better striker as well, but I think it mostly plays out in the grappling realm, and we'll see Baset control this fight. I feel pretty good about him at minus 150. Normally I'm a little bit sketchy about these guys coming out of Egypt and that Middle Eastern region, but Baset, a lot of experience under his belt. The guys that he's been facing over at UAE Warriors, decent level of competition there, and I think he'll be able to continue to showcase it here by grinding out Mike Shipman to a victory. Excuse me. Next up, Archie Colgan coming in at minus 180, going up against Manuel Sousa coming in at plus 150. Now, Colgan has been my favorite prospect on the Bellator roster for a long time. Training out of Denver, Colorado, alongside Justin Gaethje. Even had Kamaru Usman take him under his wing for a couple weeks for this training camp, but also has been training alongside him throughout his career. Comes from a wrestling background, and you can see it on full display when he goes out there and competes against his opponents. His striking is coming along very well, but he does a great job in terms of dishing out damage while grappling as well. In his last matchup against Thibaut Gouti, another referee likely would have stopped that fight in the first round when he had that waist ride position up against the cage, and he was landing emphatic hammer fists and big shots, and the referee was very close to stopping that fight, but Gouti did a great job in terms of just staying active enough. Unfortunately for him, he still got demolished for the rest of that 15 minutes and ended up losing that on the scorecards. Colgan is a beast and just waiting to explode in terms of star power and breaking into the rankings and contendership. And I think this performance here against Sousa will show that once again. And when you guys, if you guys remember earlier in the podcast when I was talking about Bellator finally putting prospects against other highly touted prospects, that's what he's fighting this weekend in Manuel Sousa, who's 11-0. Both these guys undefeated, 21-0 combined record. But Sousa comes from a striking background, does a great job in terms of implementing his power punching style. Last time around, he kind of struggled against Tim Wilde in terms of finding him for the first 3.5 minutes. But once he got the timing down, he was able to find the big punch to put Tim Wilde clean out. And that's the type of power that Sousa brings to the table. I do believe he has a bit of a cardio issue that needs to be considered. We saw it on display in his second last fight against Paulo Henrique, a fight that he ended up winning by split decision. But I think as he takes steps up in competition, it's going to be harder for him to be effective in late rounds. I expect Colgan to dictate the pace of this fight. From his wrestling to improve striking, but I think the threat of the wrestling and the clinch is going to keep Sousa gun shy and unable to pull the trigger. I think we'll see Colgan do a great job in terms of staying away from his power and then eventually putting that grind on him. I think we see Colgan win this fight relatively easily. Again, possibly competitive early, but once we start getting down the stretch, I think we'll see Colgan put this fight wherever he wants, grind this fight out, win it on the scorecards. Possible round 3 prop here on Colgan, but I think the last line that I saw on it was plus 800. It seems like the public is privy to it, but I'm still going to lean on the Colgan side and for him to win by decision. All right, next up, Tim Wilde coming in at plus 200, going up against Mark Diakiese coming in at minus 260. Starting off on the Tim Wilde side, he's actually 37. He turned 37 back in July, and he's showing a pretty good account of himself against Manuel Sousa, as I mentioned earlier, before he ended up getting clipped and finished in March of this year. He did lose to Brent Primus back in mid-2019, but since then went 5-0-1 before running into Manuel Sousa. He beat some very solid prospects as well, or at least solid fighters, in the form of Chris Gonzalez and Mike Hamill, stopping the grapple-heavy attempts and battering them on the feet with his striking advantage. He's going up against Mark Diakiese, who will be fighting for the first time outside of the UFC in 8 years. He's looking to start another chapter in his career, and he's still only 31 years old, so there still could be a bright future outside outside of the UFC for Mark Diakiese. He started off originally as a flashy striker, decent power, good speed, good explosivity, and then he fell into this grapple-heavy approach that I don't think that the UFC really enjoyed, hence why they decided to cut him after, or at least not re-sign him after he had that boring decision victory over Cowie Fernandez. This stat is very interesting. In his last 3 wins with the UFC, he landed a total of 22 takedowns and accumulated 35 minutes of control time through 45 minutes of cage time. And I think that just goes to show the maturity in Diakiese's game, knowing that, hey, I might as well just go out there and lay and prey on these guys if I can. But we saw a performance like, or opponents like Michael Johnson who were able to stop the takedowns and then batter him on the feet as Diakiese was starting to slow down after desperation takedown after desperation takedown. Now, in this matchup, I'm very surprised the line is as wide as it is. Maybe Diakiese is getting the UFC rub, and that's why he's up at minus 260. But Tim Wilde has shown that he has a great takedown defense and great get-ups. He never settles for a bad position on the mat, always working to get back to his feet. And then in the striking realm, excuse me, if his durability holds up here against Diakiese, his unorthodox movement and perpetual movement style could cause Diakiese some problems here, and we could see Wilde land a plethora of shots from distance. Again, as long as he stays conscious, if he doesn't get knocked out again, I think he looks like a very live dog here, and he can put together a much better body of work than Diakiese, stopping the takedowns and just putting the pressure on him. I think Diakiese will be more well-served to actually take a striking-heavy approach in this matchup, as that would bear more fruit than looking to just grapple here. But I think even then, in a pure striking matchup, Wilde is more live than a plus 200 indicates. So I'm going to go Wilde here and Wilde by decision. Our next up, Luke Traynor coming in at minus 650, going up against Laureanis Urbonavicius. Sorry, let me try this again. Urbonavicius coming in at plus 475. Now, Traynor is on a 3-fight winning streak since losing that fight to Simon Biong. But even in that loss to Biong, he got hurt in 2 different rounds, but did a great job in terms of battling back into those rounds. But unfortunately, obviously, the knockdowns have precedent over anything else that Traynor did in those rounds. Like I said, 3-fight winning streak now. Most importantly, handing Sullivan Culley the first loss of his professional career. Traynor showcasing a very solid all-around game. He's very aggressive with his BJJ when he's able to get the back of his opponents. He stays very active in the striking realm, utilizing his massive 6'6" frame with an 81-inch reach, utilizing that jab down the pipe, and we saw it on full display last time around as he defeated the much smaller Grant Neal. Traynor training out of a GBTT under Brad Pickett, doing a great job in terms of bringing him along, and he looks pretty well-rounded at 28 years old with just about 10 fights under his belt as well. His opponent this weekend, Urbonavicius, was scheduled to fight for Bellator for the last few years, but unfortunately he's failed to make the walk 2 straight times. He was actually scheduled to fight Traynor last year as well, and then he had another scheduled matchup earlier this year that fell through. He hasn't competed since December of 2022. He's 36 now. He has an impressive, I believe, 14-1 record. His lone defeat came by split decision. He seems to be a solid all-around opponent or fighter, in great shape, constantly training, constantly coaching as well. I just think it's kind of past his time at this point. With that said, though, I don't know if Traynor's worth a shot at minus 650. Urbonavicius could make things a little bit more interesting. But the line that has my attention in this fight is the over 1.5 at minus 140. I don't think Traynor is going to be able to get Laureanis out there as or out of there as quickly as the line indicates here. And I think that we'll see this be a little bit of a grind, a little bit of just a breakdown from Traynor, just slowly breaking down Laureanis, maybe finishing him late, but I think that we'll see Traynor take his time and eventually get the victory here. The over 1.5, much better than taking the money line here, but I do think Traynor wins. Minus 650 is just too much. All right, next up, another prospect here in Simeon Powell coming in at minus 500, going up against Rafael Xavier, coming in at plus 375. Now, Simeon Powell is coming off the first loss of his career as he got knocked out by Jakob Netto last year in the finals of the PFL Europe tournament for the light heavyweight division. And Powell had no answer for the power striking style of Netto. He landed a lot of good calf kicks as we normally see him do, landed a lot of big punches as well, but Netto walked through it all and eventually knocked out Powell in the second round. Powell, in my opinion, Very athletic, very explosive, very difficult to deal with when he can put that power on his opponents. Has shown off some grappling in his back pocket as well, but I still think he's a little bit green and a little bit raw. I still think he's working out the technical aspects of his game, and I think that's going to hinder him in some performances against guys that are much more experienced than him. And that's where he's fighting this weekend in Rafael Xavier, who has a respectable 13-7 record, but he did start his career off 7-6. Since then, he's 6-1 over his last 7 fights. His lone defeat coming against Pavel Langer. For those of you that watch Octagon, he might have a salty record, but he is a tough out. And that was a fight that I believe was 1-1 going into the final round. But I think Xavier kind of just kept his foot off the gas a little bit more than he should have, and that allowed Langer to end up getting that win that night. One judge actually had a 30-27 for Xavier that night, so very weird circumstance there. Xavier is a BJJ black belt. The better part of his earlier career was him being fed to Russian prospects, hence why he had such a bad start to his career. But when he joined Octagon in 2020, he did a great job in terms of just getting things together and then putting together that 6-1 record that I talked about. BJJ black belt, when he wants to, he does a great job in terms of staying out of bad positions, and he has a good Muay Thai game as well, where he implements a very heavy leg kicking game of his own. Again, kind of surprised at the line here. I know Powell is a highly touted prospect that a lot of people believe in, myself included. I've paid chalk on him in the past, but I think that Xavier can make this fight a lot harder than that line indicates. I think Xavier can do a good job in terms of shutting down the calf kicking game of Powell. I think Xavier is probably the cleaner striker of the two, but then it comes down to Xavier actually implementing himself here. Now, the interesting angle in this matchup is the fact that these two actually trained together just 4 or 5 months ago. 3 or 4 months ago. Both these guys helped out Johnny Walker in preparation for his UFC Riyadh matchup in June. They must have shared the cage with one another. There's even pictures on Xavier's Instagram page of these two in the same picture training alongside Johnny Walker. So a very interesting angle there. And I wonder if Xavier finds some confidence from knowing that he's training with Powell and that he could potentially get the better of him here. Powell, in my opinion, is still in the prospect era of his career, and I think Xavier, who's 33 years old, has faced some of the best fighters from around the world. I think this is a great spot for him to go out there and possibly pull off an upset. I'm willing to take the shot here at plus 375. Powell, again, could end up being, or at least his athleticism and explosivity and power could be the difference maker here. But as a pure mixed martial artist, you got to give Xavier a pretty good shot to win this fight. So plus 375, I'm happy to take a shot there. All right, main event time. Leah McCourt coming in at minus 110, going up against Sarah Collins, who comes in again at minus 110. Pick'em price here. I believe this is a number one contender fight to see who will fight Chris Cyborg next after Cyborg takes on Larissa Pacheco in October. Normally, non-title fights that are main events for Bellator, just like the UFC, are 5 rounds, but considering the short notice nature of this fight being elevated to the main event, they're still doing just 3 rounds. McCourt, grapple-heavy fighter, pulled off a solid upset last time around as she finished Sarah McMahon in the first round of her matchup. That was a interesting fight to begin with, but we saw good judo throws from McCourt that allowed her to get those dominant positions and eventually pin McMahon up against the cage and land a repeated amount of shots that the referee eventually stepped in and stopped. McCourt's striking still needs some work. That's where we see her start to come up on the short end, just as we saw when she fought Sinead Kavanagh. She is best when she's able to get that top position and grind her opponents out. She is the lone person to hand Manon Fiorot a defeat, although it was the first fight in Manon Fiorot's career, and I think if that matchup was being put together again, we would see a much different outcome in that matchup. Sarah Collins, a judo black belt, 5-0, 2-0 in Bellator now. She defeated Sinead Kavanagh in a very tepid-paced striking approach last time around, but she was very active with her leg kicks. We didn't see her get to her grappling as much as she did in her first Bellator fight, where she submitted Pam Sorensen with that scarfold armbar position that judokas love to implement. And I think that we'll see the grappling kind of cancel each other out here. I think McCourt will likely be looking to get this fight to the ground, but I think that we'll see the submission game off of the back for Collins come into play here. That will open up reversal or get up opportunities for her. And then with this fight taking place in the striking realm for the most part, again, it's kind of a wash, but I think that Collins will be a little bit more reliable to put more volume and pressure out there, and that could end up being the difference maker. Very low confidence on either side here. I do still end up leaning on the Collins side, even though McCourt has a little bit better experience against tougher strength of schedule. But Collins, again, high-level judoka player, and she's shown some pretty good things in her last couple of fights. So I'm going to go Collins by decision. Not a whole lot of confidence there. All right, there you guys go. Breakdowns for Bellator London. Appreciate the love, appreciate the support. I will be back later today for the quick picks for UFC 306, so stay tuned for that. Otherwise, good luck on all your action this weekend, folks, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.
Last thing.